DrBossKey looks at his soul key blade as it transforms from the essence of Kerakoos. The blade, glowing white-hot, reforms in his hands as the Kerakoos two-handed bastard sword.
When we started this, we spent a lot of time talking about the soul key blade, and the soul key blade wasn't ready yet. And, soul key blade came online really late, but at that point we were already starting to learn, like I said, animation. We were thinking about our art in terms of animation. I think Toby did a fantastic job helping us realize, I think the soul key blade, looking at the soul key blade here, when I animated it, we took the soul key blade and, it has this aspect where, they're sort of like blank keys, and the keys kind of reshift themselves. They can split apart kind of magnetically and reform. Then that becomes part of that transformation. Like the power lines and how they kind of like go through. And then also things like the cloth and getting that to to burn away and refuse. Like the whole thing is super, super magic sword, right? And it was really cool. I think that, this implement is one of the core, like DrBossKey is just a man, but it's this, it's about being a hero and acquiring these relics. And there's some backstory in there. I won't talk too much about it, but and these relics, they give the hero new forms of power to achieve things that they would not be able to achieve before. And I think there's a hidden subtext or an underlying subtext about the fact that DrBossKey is always amassing power. Every time he defeats an enemy, he's amassing power in a big way, right? And he's trusted with this, but you have the very Palpatine kind of thing in there, like power corrupts, right? Like, you have this, so I think that there are these underlying aspects where we're going to tell some interesting story aspects of DrBossKey and his struggle as he continues to walk through the world. And at the end of the day, when you have a pantheon of higher state energy beings, goddesses, gods, whatever, you have these big actors on the universal stage, and we're just starting to understand some of these actors, and they are, it's very, very much like the playthings of the gods kind of thing, right? Like they certainly have hidden agendas and things that we haven't seen yet, but there's so much more going on behind the scenes, and I'm looking forward to tapping into, I think, aspects of that and being able to tell those stories too. I think as we get more and more art coming together, we have the opportunity to create more and more of these, I think, animated shorts for sure. And in this shot in particular, I think it really captures a lot of like, hey, let's focus a little bit on the soul key blade, and then let's focus on the fact that this is the key piece of the transformation, right? And that it's not necessarily even attached to DBK anymore. Like it was cool that we got to get the I think the animation in from doing that. That was kind of a happy accident. It was never there until pretty much the very end. I fell into an animation hole, and I really pushed myself to figure out how to like animate these these pieces of the soul key blade itself. I really wanted the whole thing to break apart, and you can kind of see like each of the pieces kind of are moving around and shifting, right? And it was also like we were starting to get more bold, I think, with camera work. Like after I delivered the first 12 or 13 seconds in that opening shot, and I was like, hey Eddie, look at these things we can do with the camera. It pushed a better, I think, language of like, hey, what's the camera focusing on? Like we only have so much real estate, so we did things like, hey, start the shot a little bit in close. Let's take the camera and then pull it in, towards DBK and the soul key blade. We don't need to see Kerakoos as much there. And then, being able to trigger the animation for the soul key blade, I really wanted the thing to open up, right? And I wanted I think the cloth for the soul key blade to burn away and reform. Very, very much magic on that side of things. So
DrBossKey looks at his soul key blade as it transforms from the essence of Kerakoos. The blade, glowing white-hot, reforms in his hands as the Kerakoos two-handed bastard sword. 3 artifacts have fused themselves into the DrBossKey Twitch Chronicles for the Doctorhood to use.
And then I think the other piece of it too is that we were starting to carry through, and this is something I really enjoyed. Like we've got this place where we're not really describing the world, right? It's almost like a void, right? When you take a look at, am I going the right way? All right way. you know, it's this black
To the weapon.
void background. You know, Zay already pointed out the god rays. You know, it's like
He says,
this sort of like it's out of context, right? Like the moment of transference is more important than what the environment is, and part of that was a necessity because we didn't have environmental shots for this. Obviously we established them before in some of the early shots, but I think that it was a good choice not to force background imagery in here, because it would have made it even more noisy, where we were really focusing on the transference of the soul and the breakdown of the character and the exchange between them. And I think that, you know, it shows here too, right? In this shot, you know, the god rays are still there. I really like these little noisy puffy bits, like these dust bits that we've got going on, you know, and there's a little bit of noise that kind of happens. It helps keep all of the shots, even though we're going into these really close shots to depict the I think the special things happening with like the transference of the soul keyblade, the soul, etc., etc. I think that really kind of keeps it all together in the same environment, but also kind of helps us in, you know, establishing here again, like, this is what the soul keyblade becomes. It's another big kind of powerful shot, the Kerakoos bastard sword, right? And then here, like, one of the big epiphanies that I had was that, you know, we're making this, right? Like, we're making characters and animations, and, you know, it's the DrBossKey Twitch channel, and it's like, what is all of this? And I had this crazy epiphany where I was like, oh, the channel is the chronicling process of the world. It's like the channel is the window into this world, and on the show, the characters get to show up. The people, as they get to spend time here, we all get to better understand and understand the relationships between the characters, understand the characters themselves. We get to use their emotes, right? It's in Discord. You know, it has presence, and a lot of it is both real life. Like, DBK is my alter ego, but like, you know, Loki's got her own animated character, which is really cool, right? Like, and she has presence now in the show. And when we do hype videos, like, we have to use all these aspects. So not only are we telling stories and building up the story world, but the Twitch channel is like the DNA that captures the process of just being able to work on this thing, and it gets me really excited, right? Like, this is the mid to long term goal, right? As we build this up, it's able to realize these things in these interesting ways that I never thought I would realize them. And there's so many other things, like, for instance, you know, we're working on this DBK RPG. It's kind of a Final Fantasy style, you know, 16-bit style dungeon crawler, right? And in that, like, we've created a streamer class, you know, that is like DBK, so he's got special abilities. I would have never thought a streamer in an RPG was a class, right? But we created it. And then also we have the ability to tweak the art, so we can use the boss monsters that we're creating. So it kind of gives us the ability to play again in this world. We can create other things, but we have like these key touch points. And then also within the party itself, like, I can use the 2D images of DrBossKey. So like, him as like the leader in the party, and then people can join into the party from the channel. It's a whole thing, right? So I'm finding these other cross connections between the art we're creating and the experiences, and then finding them all folding themselves back into this kind of interactive experience, which is super exciting.
I agree.
I think something else that we learned here, for a first version, you know, the emotes are serviceable, you know, like, but they're not as, you know, we're taking large art, scaling down, and then cleaning it up the best we can, you know, for the lower resolution you know, emotes, right? Some stuff works well, some stuff doesn't work as well, you know, so, but we're fleshing out the channel and better understanding it, which is cool. And then we can do a secondary pass later on, I think. And, you know, some of this is like, when you're designing art, you're trying to design it for the different mediums, right? First, one of our tenets is design art for print, design it in high resolution, and make sure you have the opportunity to have assets, because you're only going to build them once. You know, asking someone to redraw something at high resolution, you can do it, but you're basically reinterpreting the art at that point. So better to go always from high to low. And then, you know, subsequently, that when you go super low in terms of resolution, like, you know, 18 by 18 or 24 by 24, anything in those lower pixel resolutions, you have to have an interpretation of that. And sometimes, you know, like Kerakoos' face, his face is pretty noisy. Like, these work fairly okay, but like the Kerakoos bastard sword didn't really work at all, just because it's too thin. And so we learned a lot by by doing that, but it also isn't stopping us from, I think, creating the art itself. So we're still doing it, but I realize how powerful Discord is for us being able to play with with these emotes and being able to express yourself. So that's been a lot of fun, and I was really into, and I still am, these like 4-panel faces. Like you get bigger presence. So now if I only had I had more I think emote slots, it would be fantastic. So I know there are a couple things we can do to work around that, and I haven't explored those quite yet. So. But yeah, I think having this part of the video and showing these artifacts, like, hey, we had this journey. Here's this thing now, and by the way, you're very much watching a piece of content that is part of this platform that is the DrBossKey show.
No, I think it's really great tying it back into. I like the way that we put the emotes that were drawn together into the video and kind of melded them into the stream. It really brought it back into the show.
Yeah, I like that it almost found its way. It's like it was always going somewhere, and it must have been like a eureka sort of moment when you realize uh, it's probably one of those things that almost feels obvious in the end. When you explain it, it's like, but yeah, I love that aspect of it.
Yeah, no, it definitely an epiphany. You sometimes just create stuff and you're not quite sure yet how it's going to fit, and then the threads all find their way into something that then you're like, oh, this totally makes sense. And sometimes you're the last one to discover it, and the art is sort of leading you in that respect. So then we have the final shot here, and I think part of what I was looking for, right, is kind of a closure message, something that ties it all back together.
The blade glowing white hot reforms in his hands as the Kerakoos two-handed bastard sword. 3 artifacts have fused themselves into the DrBossKey Twitch Chronicles for the Doctorhood to use.
And I think there, right, I like the message. It reinforces that hey, at the end of this, now DrBossKey has the Kerakoos bastard sword. We've named the thing, right. It reminds people of kind of where it's at in terms of the its presence on the show, right? Like, I really love my little like animated toy buttons, kind of like animation bits. And then I think we just recently did an additional design update because we're very happy colors normally. And so these are still our brand colors. So we went down to a little bit more of a muted color palette. We added in the DrBossKey combat idol, right? Like, this is something that we just finalized, 2 weeks ago, I think last
During
week.
the Chaos Wars.
And I think the other side of it too is I wanted to have something that at the end really I sort of reinforced what was going on, right? Like, you've got you've got this like text that's a little bit old and it's broken apart. We have like the sandy cloud bits, right? And then you have the kind of message in there. And then also, like, it's very memey, I guess, I mean, also the Kerakoos is watching you. I don't know why I enjoy it as much. But we like, it gives Kerakoos something else to be about other than just a faceless monster. So he's sort of like the big brother of the Doctorhood. He's always paying attention. And now that he is being wielded by DrBossKey, he's still sentient. He's still alive. He's still now part of that. It's just that his power now is part of the DrBossKey arsenal. So it took us a little while to get to the shots. And I put Eddie on a tutorial journey to some degree. I think we purchased something special here instead of having to create it by hand, which was totally fine. But I think the other thing that I really liked was that we carried the wind down of the audio. The music falls out. We stay with the wind. I would have done a crossfade, I think, on this onto the outro card, but that we don't go into like an end of stream jingle or any of that stuff. So I really like the whole way the whole thing kind of closed, and it felt like it belonged, I think, after all was said and done. All right, I think we've talked this thing to death. So why don't we just leave a little room for any last questions? We won't go too long here. Takeaways, things that we're going to do different, I think, in the future. I mean, I kind of already touched on this from my side, which is, I want to, now that we've manifested this, I want to be a little bit more heavy with a more technical screenplay. It's not how they get done normally, but that's a big takeaway for me. I want to discuss, like, now that we've discovered like how we want to do effects, that we want to be heavy on effects, I want to talk about those effects sooner and incorporate them in, so we can really start to research each of the shots that we want to do. There's some really cool stuff in the DrBossKey Lore animatic that I'm really excited about, or sorry, DrBossKey Lore script that I'm really excited to explore and to visualize. I think that's pretty cool. Those are big takeaways for me. I want to try to keep us from, I want to see if we can construct a tighter loop to make more. I think these are great. I'd like to get our production, I think, efforts more compact and reduced, so we can go in, do a crazy focus, work through those iterations, disrupt our normal content pipelines, and then, to have the whole thing come out. It would be great, especially since we're pretty much done with Gondis. We're done with Loki. Those are two animated shorts that we're definitely doing. I think other than that, one of the things I also want to do is I want to be more concrete about like the environmental shots, so we can go in and talk about speed painting those shots and working on because when you go to create assets for it, it's like you then have even if you're like, hey, here's the limit, I want a 1 hour speed paint, maybe 2, and then turn those in, you still wind up doing 2 or 3 iterations on those, and then you have a little bit of tech art to like separate those, because those are aspects that you want to put into like the to the motion graphics side of the animated shorts, right? So you can get parallaxing and scaling and things like that. Sometimes you use those aspects as parts of effects and animation. So now that I see those a lot more, I want to get ahead of those sooner as opposed to later. And basically also just having stub-ins, so then as we build up the context of the script and the rough cuts, and truly animatics, that those can also better serve the artist doing the speed paints, so they can better get a sense for that. I think those are the big things from my side of things. Zay, Eddie?
Talking about this tonight, I'm going to be interested to see sort of like what follows through in terms of visual style and in the art as well. Like even when you were mentioning, say, something like the first person shots, right? And then the likes of the those sort of like void, I think you referred to it as like those void shots with the with reveal of the sword and stuff. It would be cool. Yeah, well, it might. I don't know. We'll see what happens. But to have some sort of consistency or solidify some sort of a congruent sort of motifs within all of the videos.
It serves as a style guide that reinforces the ritual, right? So one thing is true is that DrBossKey consumes he transforms all his defeated enemies into living artifacts, right? Living weapons, things like that. So and it very well, I think in Assassin's Creed they did that thing, right, where Ezio and the main characters, like when they did the flashback of like, oh, I'm releasing you type of thing, often they took place in these like in these sort of like void spaces, right, where they weren't really in the world. It was almost like this inside kind of remembrance or communication. So they were memories, right? So not that I was drawing that from inspiration, but I see a language style that you can develop in that space too.
Awesome. I agree. And it leaves me wondering about this project, since we're kind of talking about the future and what we would change with the future. So, if we could go back in time and change 3 things about this project, what do you think we would change?
I think, we talked about it already, but I would change the upfront writing process, which I'm already doing. That's one thing for sure. I would change I think I would change potentially the process in which we're doing the final edits, or we're doing the editing. So in case Eddie and I need to try pass things back and forth, just working out of After Effects, or at least doing an After Effects, I think dump, and then if we need to do a final render in Premiere, I mean, we could certainly do that. But just getting kind of on the same tool set, that's one thing. I think then probably the last thing is, I think we're already doing this now, but now that we have a better understanding of what happens in the world between the characters, it's not all cookie cutter, but we're already preparing the art assets for doing animation, right? So I think we can do a little bit more character animation and things like that now that we have Eddie as well, or not Eddie, but have Brian as well. That and Eddie as well. So like when we talk about animating parts of a character, you know, now that the characters are cut up, like it's a little bit easier to get them, you know, as opposed to having to do the tech art. Like you can actually move those frames around, you know, and I think have an efficiency through that. I think those are the big ones on my side of things.
No, I totally agree. I think that those are all, we've already started taking the steps towards changing a lot of it. And we have learned from Kerakoos going into the Gondas animatic. And I think that the Gondas animatic is going to be a vast improvement. Not to say that Kerakoos isn't absolutely amazing. I don't even know what Gondas is going to be if Kerakoos is amazing.
Well, I think the art is good. I'm proud of the work we did. Yes, I don't know if I would call it amazing, but but it's very kind of you to say so. I really do appreciate that. And I think we achieved a lot. And I mean, for our first version, for our first release, this is some of the content I'm most proud of that we made. You know, we make a lot of content on the show. And I think you're right, in that the learnings from this, where it's only going to become better in all aspects. So I think we have a better understanding of being more consistent with our art, how we want to use the different types of art, you know, the effects. Like we didn't really have an effects language at all until we start working through this. Now I know that part of the job is then to sit down and go, here are the 20 or so effects I want us to experiment with, to explore with, to kind of convey this shot. You know, or here's the 5 or 6 effects I think we can use. And that automatically will speed Eddie up and give us the ability to create a different level back and forth. And that'll give a bit more just cohesiveness. I'm not going to lie. I think there is, I like that saying, not going to lie most of the time though, you know, but when I really don't, I'm lying. So I really, with the way that we're doing things, I have some itches to scratch in both doing some like motion comics, you know, good 26 page motion comics with the comic style. I mean, we're establishing characters, key aspects of the DrBossKey world. So I could see we could turn this into a comic. Like, you know, I could see establishing a style, and instead of doing an animated short, like working on, you know, maybe like a, you know, like an hour-long feature or something like that. That's something that is really like you know, an animated movie. You know, maybe a short movie, or not short, but like an episode or something like that. I mean, for that, I could see us taking a lot of what we put together, doing a lot of this legwork, establishing our process, and then saying, okay, time to go to India and find a studio that their whole shtick is they do animation, and we could contract with them, and then all of a sudden, you know, we're there's nothing real such as all of a sudden, but we could, you know, find ourselves making you know, an animated feature. You know, I think that there's opportunities where I have plenty of stories I want to tell. There's plenty of things I'm interested in, maybe too many things, but I can see those outcomes being something for us completely. So a lot of what we're seeding and working on now is setting, and we're building a brand, we're building a world. You know, we're building a lot of content, and that content is going to find forms in so many different ways than what we're even realizing right now.
And we do have a question from Lyndon.
Okay.
curious. I feel like I know the answer, but I'm curious to see what you say. So he says, "What's the end game of the story that we've built so far? As a writer, he likes to envision the beginning and the end and then build the middle. So have we already envisioned the end, or is the world vastly growing?"
I think I don't think we have an end. I think we have some story arcs that I really want to realize. I think I touched on this a little bit earlier, but like DrBossKey is creating or is collecting these implements of power, right? Like, and the reason why he goes to these worlds is because they're imbalanced, right? And when you put a fine line to that, it's not just good versus evil, right? If evil's too crazy, too powerful, and it's crushing good, and you take away the evil, there in that void, good then becomes the overpowering essence. And I think if you have too much good in the world, it can be just as bad as having too much evil, right? Like that's sort of that's a main theme in the world, I think. And so what I'm really excited about is exploring this aspect of power corrupts and what happens when DrBossKey is holding to an influence of power. What happens to his psyche? What happens to his character? What happens to his relationships in the world? What keeps him anchored? How does he balance that within himself? Is he a vessel for just trying to temporarily contain this? What happens if he loses control? And this evil finds a way to escape. I think there's so many places that we can go to. But also what that also implies, right, is that what about the worlds where the angels are no better than the demons because they rule with an iron fist, and they don't, and as a result, you have, while it's perceived as the light side of the dark, it's still just as bad, and I think I'm interested in telling stories in that space. So, I don't have a set ending, but I definitely have a lot of character arcs. We have this overarching story where, in this pantheon of higher state energy beings, they generally have these representatives from these different worlds. And Allura is one of the more ancient goddesses on the light side, and she's been losing in terms of her collective worlds to essentially the dark side for a long time. And she used to have a number of these knights. Hey, it's NFG Tech. It's rating with a party of 4. And so DrBossKey is one of the, not necessarily one of the last, but he's sort of a knight for her in this category, and that's she gives him the Soul Key blade. So I'm very interested in exploring those aspects. I like when something appears as one thing and turns out to be an entirely different thing, and that causes the character to have a self-reflection point.
I feel like there's only there's 3 lingering questions that I have in mind, but I will ask you probably just one of them. And what do you think has been the hardest part of this project thus far?
I think the hardest part of the project so far, in my perspective, is you're juggling a lot of balls that aren't fully formed. Where we started it, we had one piece of art, that was it. We had plenty of art that was in flight, and it was the first. The first is always the hardest. And I think that it's the hardest because you have a lot of unknowns. Now we have a better idea of what we're getting into, and I think there we go. I wasn't my camera wasn't on, and I think that that's probably been the hardest part. The other part is that learning to speak the language. Like we're making shit up as we go. Like how do you describe an effect? How do you describe a shot? Like, yes, there's some analogs out in the world, but I'm not a movie director, right? So I found myself learning different things and trying to speak or at least drawing from different interests that I've had in the past. Like things like, hey, when you're shooting a conversation, like, you generally want to keep the character on the same side of the screen, even if you change the shot, when you flip back and forth between the characters, stuff like that. And then realizing those things and then being able to share those, I think, and be able to communicate about them has been pretty huge. But they've all been hard, very hard.
Awesome. I think that's a great answer. And I agree. I think that just the way that it's pieced together, and I think the processes that we've put in for, new segmented characters is just going to make everything a lot easier. moving forward. And if we would have had them from the beginning, it would be totally different story here.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, I think about it like a big piece of it is that, you know, I still feel like a you know, a giant pink man baby child, you know, where I'm like playing with action figures on the floor, you know, I'm just making it up as we go, right? Like, and then, you know, whether they're digital or not, like it very much feels that way, you know, and that's super. I don't want to lose that. I like I've always loved how that's felt, and I don't think we have enough opportunities in life to go back to that spot and kind of be able to, you know, replay and imagine things like that between our characters and, you know, the things that we make. So what about you, Eddie? What do you think?
Just on that point, I feel like that's an extension of video games in general. You know, I feel like that's kids who love doing that. Like I played with toys with my brothers like all day, every day, and I think that's naturally like, you know, where you go to with video games because it's almost like the next step. Anyway, the hardest thing for me, I feel like I've had more. Uh, I've had things made easier for me because of the direction that I've got. You know, nothing really felt. They were like it was challenges, you know, rather than hard. I don't feel it really describes it aptly for me because, you know, if I had to say something, it's just the technicalities about learning new things, deciding what, you know, the difference between what is work and what is learning right here. You know, because it all just became one at one stage. You know,
Mhm.
particularly with some of the newer things. Yeah, but it was really just like the, you know, the technical challenges of, you know, wanting to. I think it's really important, you know, when you're doing a project like this, to listen to who's directing you and really know that it's important to that person when it's coming from their brain, like it's coming from your brain, right? And that's one of those, you know, personal things ever when you're trying to like convey something that you've created, right? And you don't want to let that person down. So really, um, I suppose the biggest challenge was, you know, trying to manifest that in a way that you recognized it when I gave it back to you, right?
I think that, you know, something with that as well is that we had a number of brain dumps, right? Where I'm like, all right, this and this and this and this, and it's like, here's 40 things to go off and do. And the reality is that when it comes back, you know, if half of them get done, great. You know, sometimes there's less, sometimes there's more, sometimes it went in different directions, right? And to not get frustrated, but to work with the process, I mean, that's pretty huge. You know, being patient is always a tough thing. And no matter who you are, no matter how well you describe it, you know, maybe if you can break things down into just very, very simplified pieces and not too many, you can maybe get a better kind of turnaround with these things. But, you know, I think a lot of it is you have to realize that no matter how your perception of how well you communicated something or imagined something or will miss details, it doesn't make you the authority and perfect. You make mistakes as well. You make mistakes with communicating. And you just have to accept that as part of the creative process. A lot of people, when they try to work on developing experiences, they get so fixated on trying to make that one perfect thing. And then, you know, the worst thing that can happen is when they turn their perception of like, well, I'm doing everything all right. Like it must be everyone else around me, right? And you know, life is complicated. People are complicated. Experiences are complicated. And our perception of how we are communicating and doing things on our own, or trying to do things within the group, that's an art form. That's something that takes practice and time and patience. You know, always treat the people around you as much as you can with humility and understanding that, you know, we're all trying our best to work on things. You know, if someone truly isn't, that's a different story. But you know, that's not. None of us get up and spend, you know, the hours we spend every week working together because we have nothing better to do, right? And that's a very humbling process. To build a team, to build experiences, to build these things has been, you know, it's been an ultimate pleasure. I mean, I've been lucky to have professional experience that I can apply to this, but you know, it doesn't. You know, I worked with a lot of type A people that are very aggressive and this is the way it should be. And I'm, you know, like, and maybe this is wisdom that comes with time, you know, but like, you know, I definitely, by working with these types of folks, I can appreciate the amount of passion and pressure that comes with that, you know, but I also understand that, you know, if you really want to try to get the most out of the people that work with you, it's a collaboration, and it's a process of asking, of serving, of being of service, and being appreciative of the work that you're doing.
Yeah, so we have one more question, and it is just, when do you decide to stop a project like this? And is it hard to finally pull the plug and move on to the next project?
Great question. I think it's a great question. So the reality, I think, is that in just about every project, you don't have infinite resources. So you try your best to deliver as close to what your vision was. You know, and once you get to that point where it's truly diminishing returns, or that you need to move on because of finances, those are the easy ones, right? Sometimes at some point you have to ship a game, right? At some point you have to deliver a project. At some point you have to, you know, you have hard constraints. Someone needs to move on to another project. They only have so many hours for your project, right? Those are the easy ones to some degree. And now the harder one is when you can rob Paul to pay Peter, right? Like you're just moving resources around, and you can keep doing that. And you can do that as long as you have the resources for it. It doesn't necessarily make things better. You might be fixing things, you know. But I think the other side of it too is that, and this is the fuzzy side of the question, right? Like when, for me, I try to keep in the back of my brain a few things, right? How much time have we spent doing this? Because the longer something takes for me, the more inherently I get frustrated at us not achieving the progress that I would like to be making. You know, like you have to be careful with that, because it's very easy to create unreasonable, you know, expectations, right? The reason why I spent 10, 11, 12 hours working on a Soul Keyblade animation is because I really wanted to know what it would take, like, you know, and that's just a first for me. And there's some things that take longer for me, but there's no one that's going to build that in an hour, right? Like, and so if you start to think you're going to get stuff like that at an hour just because you can imagine it, you're completely off basis at that point. So then it becomes a question of like, how long is something taking? And then when you want to construct a certain shot or a narrative or a storyline, you know, this is the way it works, like in a lot of film and TV production too, right? Which is when I have so many scenes, some of them don't make sense. Some of them we miss something. Some have you know, reshoot problems where you have to reshoot them, or you didn't get the right shots you're looking for, et cetera, et cetera. And so at the end of the day, a lot of times it becomes like a, you know, like a puzzle, and like, okay, well, we want to achieve X. It would take Y to redo this many shots or retakes, or to try to make the story make sense. Then you start pulling things away in order to like reach that deadline. And I think the last part of that too is that there's no formula for this. And that is, you know, when do you feel, and this is always dangerous, right? So when do you feel happy enough that you're not completely embarrassed by the work, right? And as you gain experience, your ability to understand, to look at other art, you know, to look at animation and to look at some of the stuff that inspires you, to get to that level, like what we're doing right now, we're not making, we're not making like, you know, Ninja Scroll animation, like, and, you know, animated shorts by any measure, right? Like, you know, our movies in this case, and that, you know, but I think that we're exploring the medium, and that's important, right? And there's no real answer for that other than, you know, for me, it's understanding how long something's taking, and the longer it takes, the more it puts everything else behind. And if I do want us to complete an animated short, then it's about understanding like how much further out we are. Like I'm always asking myself this question, like, when are we going to land a version of this? When are we going to land a version that we can share with people? When are we going to land a version where we can really be done with it? And there's no real answer other than it has more good things than bad things. You try to stay away from as much as possible good enough. Oh, it's good enough. You know, good enough puts you in a territory where you're making mediocrity. If you can't find the inspiration and passion in the things you're working in, it's not going to come into your art from your team. And there's plenty of shovelware in the world, and that's okay. Like there's a place for those types of things too. But I think in order to push yourself, you have to always be careful with it. It's good enough? It's good enough. Let's move on. It's good enough. Let's move on. Right? Like Sometimes you need to make that call and understand that. But if you start to create that as your go-to for just like in the sake of getting it done, you're going to be in a place where at the end of the day, you have work that you're probably not very passionate about or that you're not proud of. So not a great, I think, guidebook for it, but that's sort of my take on it.
No, I agree. I think that, you know, we have gone through so many iterations, and each one, you know, like we touched on earlier, if we can get at least half of what we were thinking was going to get accomplished that round, then that's progress. And sometimes you have to break it down and really kind of hone in and focus on a certain aspect to get it right. But then once that aspect is correct, it's like everything else just kind of falls into place and just moves smoothly after that.
Mm-hmm. All right, maybe one last question. Any closing comments, thoughts?
No questions are left. No thoughts other than I've already kind of let chat know. Guys, Kerakoos is just the first. We have an entire board full of amazing characters that are going to be brought to life probably over the next year, 2 years, 3 years, who knows? So just stay tuned if you are really enjoying this content, for sure.
Yes, I agree. I agree. Daryl says more DLC. Absolute. All right, Eddie. With that, do you have anything closing? Any closing bits, thoughts?
Just you know, this was great. I love being a part of all of this. You know, with regard to like the DBK lore, everything going on with the world and everything. Yeah, it's one of my favorite things. I don't to just absorb, especially like worlds like created by what am I looking for? So like lore and steeping yourself in a fantasy world. You know, it's amazing and to be a part of something like that and one that's so awesome. It's great. I love it.
I appreciate that. And it is quite satisfying to work on. It's a lot of hard work. But I feel like I don't ever have enough time to get it all done. And it's a lot of times it's spinning plates, trying to just keep enough stuff moving so we're going in certain directions. And that's always a challenge too. But I this is very much satisfying something, and I'm in a wonderful place in life, where I worked very hard, but I have these opportunities to have these as my hobbies. And like talking to the 15-year-old version of myself and telling him that we could be doing these types of things and we could imagine characters and do animation and do anything we kind of want with them is really it's a fantastic journey. And to have found friends and community members and people that are willing to spend time with me and and think that the work is worth working on is truly it's truly a dream. And I'm super stoked with that. So I can't wait to see where things go. It's a great journey.
I also want to say hello to everybody. I meet everybody in chat almost every day.
Mm-hmm.
I'm never here live because obviously it's like 6:30 a.m. In Ireland, which is where I'm from. But I know everybody so well, and nobody, it's so weird to to be a stranger to all of these people who I've been, watching over for the last 8 months. It's so I'm here. I'm always watching, guys.
I remember having that conversation with Eddie. I was like, Eddie goes through and scrubs our content and cuts it up for us and creates amazing videos out of it. And he probably knows more about chat than chat knows about chat. And there's just something that's kind of mysteriously creepy about that. But I really enjoy it. It's like Eddie is the watcher. We should have one.
I totally get off on it.
Phrasing.
Phrasing.
Lana. Phrasing. Yeah, Tony says, DrBossKey, Zay, and Eddie, thank you all for sharing this amazing experience. It really is awesome to see the effect that DBK has had on the two of you and all of us in one way or another, and the positive growth he fosters. Aw, that's very kind of you, Tony. Thank you very much. Yeah, I mean, look, we just dedicated a whole evening to something that we worked on for months. I think that, like I said, this is some of the best content we've created. It's very exciting, you know, and I think that there's no shortage of stories and ideas and concepts. And if this is just us getting started, I can't wait to see where we're going to be 6 months from now, a year from now. All right, friends. It was wonderful. Thank you for making the time. Eddie, thanks for staying up all night for us. That was very kind of you. Thank you very much. I love you guys. Thank you so much.